I almost threw away $333 million with the morning trash. Funny, isn't it, how the biggest moments of your life never arrive with warning signs? It was an ordinary Thursday. Cold, gray, the kind of day where even the coffee tastes tired. I remember standing in my small kitchen, sorting through old receipts and grocery lists, humming a song my late husband used to whistle. That's when I found it, a crumpled lottery ticket shoved deep in my coat pocket. For a moment I didn't even recognize it. The ink was slightly faded, the paper soft from rain. I'd bought it weeks ago on a whim after picking up cat food. My cashier had said, "You never know, ma'am. Someone's gotta win." I had smiled politely and tucked it away, fully intending to forget. And I did. Until that morning. The news was murmuring in the background. Something about record-breaking lottery numbers. I wasn't really listening until I caught the last two digits. My eyes flicked to the ticket in my hand. Then back to the screen. The numbers matched. All of them. I froze. My breath caught somewhere between disbelief and laughter. My old heart thudded in my chest like it wanted to break free. I grabbed my reading glasses, checking again and again, whispering under my breath like a prayer gone wrong. This can't be real. Oh my God, it's real. My knees went weak. I had to grip the counter just to stay upright. I must have stood there for a full minute before the sound of the kettle whistling snapped me back. The world suddenly felt too loud. The fridge hummed like thunder. Even the clocks ticking mocked me, counting down to a life I couldn't yet imagine. I sat down, hands trembling, staring at that slip of paper. It didn't feel like a blessing. Felt like a secret too heavy to hold. My husband, Robert, would have laughed and twirled me around the kitchen. But he'd been gone 6 years now. The laughter left with him. My sons, Paul and Richard? They'd see numbers, not me. They'd measure their love in dollars and inheritance, not hugs and dinners. I knew it the way mothers just know. I looked at the ticket one last time and whispered, "You can't tell them, Evelyn." Not one soul. The next few hours blurred. I called the lottery office in a shaking voice, trying to sound casual. The woman on the line congratulated me. She sounded more excited than I felt. I wrote down everything she said, double-checked the claim date, and tucked the ticket into an old cookbook between recipes for apple pie and Sunday roast. That book had fed my family for decades. Now it guarded my fortune. I didn't rush to claim it. For 3 days I just lived my old life. Same routines, same silence. I swept the porch, fed my cat, watered the plants. The world felt smaller now, like I was walking through it with a secret too bright to hide. When I finally went to the lottery office, I wore my plainest clothes. Gray cardigan. Orange shoes. Hair pinned back. I wanted to look invisible. The security guard opened the door for me without a second glance. Inside, the woman at the counter smiled kindly. "Congratulations, Mrs. Carter. You're officially a multimillionaire." Her words didn't land. They just floated there, unreal. I remember signing the forms with numb fingers. The cameras flashed. They asked if I wanted a public photo. I shook my head so fast it startled them. "No pictures," I said. "I'd rather stay quiet." She nodded like she understood. But I could see the curiosity in her eyes. A story untold, sealed behind my trembling smile. When I stepped back into the sunlight, I felt both rich and ruined. The check in my purse weighed nothing, and everything. I kept touching it through the fabric, half afraid it would vanish if I let go. The city looked different that day. The air was sharper. People brushed past me, unaware they'd just bumped into someone worth hundreds of millions. I walked home instead of taking a cab. The quiet helped me think. Every corner I turned, my thoughts whispered louder. Who can you trust? Who deserves to know? By the time I reached my gate, I already knew the answer. No one. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at my reflection in the dark window. My house was small, old, and creaked like tired bones, but it was mine. I didn't need mansions or yachts. I needed peace. Still, deep down, another voice whispered, "They'll find out eventually." I shook it off and slipped the winning ticket into the metal tin where I kept Robert's war medals. If anyone found it, they'd think it was just more of my nostalgia. Then I poured myself a cup of tea, my hands steady at last. That day, I whispered to the quiet house. Not a soul would ever find out. I learned that love can sound like laughter, and still be hollow underneath. It was Sunday, the one day my family pretended to care. Every week I cooked dinner because it was tradition, though lately it felt more like obligation. The smell of roast chicken filled the house, the same way it had for 40 years. Only now the warmth in the air didn't come from love. It came from habit. My sons arrived late as always. Paul first with his wife Linda. The kind of woman who greeted me with kisses that never touched her eyes. Then Richard and his wife, Denise, who treated politeness like a performance. Jamie trailed behind them holding a small bag of groceries. He was the only one who noticed the empty coffee jar on my counter and quietly replaced it. "Just thought you might need it, Grandma," he whispered. It was such a small gesture, but it made my throat tighten. We sat around the table, the clatter of silverware breaking the silence. Conversation flowed easily at first. Talk of new cars, home renovations, the latest vacation photos flashing on their phones. But soon, as it always did, the subject turned to money. "Can you believe what houses are worth these days?" Richard said, carving into his chicken like it had insulted him. "Even Mom's little place here could fetch a fortune." Linda laughed. "Oh please. She's sitting on gold and doesn't even know it." My fork froze halfway to my mouth. They said it like a joke, but I felt the truth pulsing behind their laughter. I watched them carefully one by one. Paul talked about a business loan he couldn't quite get approved. Denise complained about tuition payments. None of them asked if I needed anything. Not one asked how I was managing since my savings dried up. The lie I'd soon tell to test them. At that table, surrounded by the people I'd raised and fed and worried for, I suddenly felt like a stranger in my own home. It's strange, isn't it? How you can love someone for decades and still not know them until money's on the table. "Mom," Paul said, leaning back in his chair. "You've still got Dad's life insurance, right? You should really think about putting it somewhere safe. You know, in case something happens." "Something happens." He said it so casually, like my life was a chess piece to be moved for convenience. "I'll manage," I said softly. Linda smiled, tilting her head like she was humoring a child. "We just want to make sure you're comfortable." The word comfortable slid off her tongue like poison wrapped in silk. Jamie shot her a look. "Grandma's fine. She doesn't need anyone handling her money." Silence. Richard coughed, changing the subject to a new investment app. But the air had shifted, heavier now, thick with the scent of greed. I excused myself to clear the dishes, pretending not to notice their whispers when I left the room. From the kitchen doorway I caught fragments of their conversation, words that cut sharper than knives. "She's probably sitting on more than she admits. If she's smart, she'll leave the house to the boys. At her age, what's she even saving for?" I gripped the counter until my knuckles whitened. They didn't know, of course. They didn't know that their broke old mother was now worth $333 million. And for the first time I felt an emotion stronger than guilt. Power. When I returned, they smiled like nothing had happened. Denise complimented the meal. Paul raised his glass to family. But I'd seen their true faces, reflected in the glint of the silverware, the tightness around their eyes, the way Linda's gaze lingered on the diamond ring she'd bought on credit. Jamie helped me carry the plates to the sink. "You okay, Grandma?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "Just tired, sweetheart." But what I really meant was, tired of pretending this is love. After they left, the house fell silent again. Only the ticking clock kept me company, its steady rhythm sounding like a countdown, not to death but to revelation. I walked into the living room and looked at the family portrait above the fireplace. Robert stood tall in the middle, proud, steady, holding our boys as if nothing could ever break us apart. I wondered what he'd think now, if he'd see what I saw. Their smiles looked different to me now. Plastic. Polished. Paid for by expectations. I traced my fingers over the glass and whispered, "You'd be disappointed, love." That night I lay awake in bed replaying the evening. Every word, every glance, every fake laugh carved itself into my mind. I realized something painful and undeniable. They didn't come for me anymore. They came for what I might leave behind. So I made a silent decision. If money was all they saw when they looked at me, then I'd take it away and see what was left. I stared at the ceiling, feeling a strange calm settle over me. I knew then, I whispered into the dark. My family loved the idea of my money more than me. I wanted to believe love was still somewhere in them. But you can't see what's true until you strip everything else away. After that dinner, the idea came to me slowly, like a dangerous whisper I couldn't ignore. If they only saw money when they looked at me, then I would take it away. I told myself it wasn't revenge. It was revelation. That week I invited everyone over again. Same roast chicken. Same table. Same seats. But this time the warmth had left the house long before they arrived. They came late, again. Paul smelled faintly of cologne and impatience. Linda looked bored before she even sat down. Richard brought a bottle of cheap wine like it was an apology for something he hadn't said yet. Jamie came last, helping me with the dishes before dinner began. He didn't ask why I'd called everyone. He just smiled and said, "You look tired, Grandma. Need a hand?" I almost broke right there. But I had to stay strong. Because tonight the test would begin. I waited until halfway through the meal. Their plates were full, their glasses half empty, their laughter just a little too loud. That's when I put down my fork and said quietly, "I have something to tell you." 4 pairs of eyes turned to me. I made a bad investment," I began, letting my voice tremble just enough. "The money your father left, the savings, it's gone. I lost almost everything." The silence that followed wasn't shock. It was calculation. Linda blinked first. "Wait, what do you mean gone?" Paul frowned. "You didn't talk to me first? I could have helped manage it." "You've always been too trusting, Mom," Richard added, shaking his head. "You should have let me handle things." Not one of them said, "Are you okay?" Not one. I felt my chest tighten. Their concern wasn't for me, it was for the future they'd already counted as theirs. Jamie's fork clinked softly against his plate. "Grandma," he said, his voice low and worried, "are you gonna be okay? You still have the house, right? You can stay with me if you need to." That one sentence, that boy's heart, was the only warmth in the room. Linda sighed. "Jamie, don't be dramatic. Your grandmother's always been independent." Paul added, "We'll figure something out later. Maybe she can sell this place before it loses value." So, value. That's what I had become, property not person. I nodded slowly, pretending to agree. "Maybe you're right. Maybe it's time for some changes." I could feel my voice steady now, steel beneath the sadness. "I suppose this is a lesson learned." Richard leaned back, wiping his mouth. "Well, Mom, it happens. Just try not to make it worse." And just like that, the conversation shifted. Back to business, holidays, sports. My confession had lasted less than a minute before they buried it beneath convenience. Except for Jamie. He stayed quiet, his eyes following me as I carried the dishes away. When I returned, he whispered, "You didn't really lose it all, did you?" I forced a smile. "It's complicated, sweetheart." He didn't push. He just nodded, concern shadowing his young face. When dinner ended, the others left quickly. Paul had early meetings. Linda had a headache. Richard needed to check on the car. Not one of them asked if I needed help cleaning up. Jamie stayed. He rolled up his sleeves, stacked the plates, and began washing them without a word. The sound of running water filled the empty space their absence left behind. Finally he spoke. "I don't care about the money, Grandma. I just don't like seeing you sad." I couldn't answer. My throat was too tight. As he dried the last plate, he turned to me. "You should eat something, okay? I'll bring soup tomorrow." I laughed softly. "You don't have to do that." "I know," he said. "But I want to." When he left, I stood alone in the kitchen, his words echoing in the quiet. "I want to." No one else had said that in years, not without expecting something in return. I walked to the window and watched his car disappear into the night. The sky was clear, the stars scattered like secrets I wasn't ready to share. I pressed my palm against the glass and whispered, "Maybe there's still one good heart left in this family." Behind me, the house groaned in the dark, heavy with ghosts and unspoken truths. The test had only just begun. And already I knew who would pass and who would fail. Silence can scream louder than anger. It started with missed calls, 1 or 2 at first. Then whole days went by without a word. The house that once buzzed with family noise had gone still. Even the ticking clock in the hallway began to sound cruel, like it was counting how long I'd been forgotten. I told myself they were busy. Everyone has lives after all. But deep down I knew better. After the investment, I became inconvenient. The mother who gave, who hosted, who held everything together, she'd been replaced by a problem no one wanted to solve. Every morning I stared at my phone, waiting for it to light up with a message that never came. I'd scroll through old photos instead, pretending they were checking in. Pretending I still mattered. Sometimes I even left voicemails, my voice bright and hopeful, just calling to say hello. "I made that casserole you like." But no one called back. Not Paul. Not Richard. Not Linda. Only Jamie sent the occasional text. A heart, how's your day? But even those stopped after a while. Maybe they told him not to get too involved. Maybe he saw how uncomfortable it made them. After 2 weeks of silence, I couldn't take it anymore. I baked a pie, Linda's favorite apple and cinnamon, and drove to her house unannounced. The sky was gray that morning, the kind of colorless day that mirrors what's inside you. I stood at her doorstep, pie trembling slightly in my hands, rehearsing a smile. When the door opened, she didn't even look surprised. Just annoyed. "Oh," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "Evelyn, we're kind of in the middle of something right now." I peered past her shoulder. I could see the dining table set with plates, glasses, laughter. A family dinner I wasn't invited to. "I won't stay," I murmured. "Just thought I'd drop this off." She hesitated, then sighed. "You really shouldn't have. We're eating soon." Eating. Without me. The same table I used to sit at every Sunday, now full of faces that didn't lift to greet me. "Paul's not here," she added quickly. "He's been busy lately, work's been insane." Busy. That word again. The polite weapon people use when they don't want to see you. "I understand," I said, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Tell him I stopped by." She nodded, already closing the door. "Of course. Take care, Evelyn." The door clicked shut before I'd even turned away. I stood there for a long time, pie still warm in my hands, feeling the sting spread through me like frost. On the drive home, I pulled over once just to breathe. The road was empty, the air heavy. I looked at the pie on the passenger seat and laughed quietly to myself. It sounded hollow, strange, like a sound from someone else's mouth. They used to fight over my pies. Now they couldn't make space for one on their table. I drove the rest of the way in silence. Back home, the house greeted me like a tomb. The chairs sat where they always did. The air smelled faintly of old perfume and disappointment. I placed the pie on the counter, untouched, and sat in the kitchen until the sun began to fade. The shadows crept up the walls like slow-moving ghosts. That's when I realized something cruel. It wasn't just that they didn't care about my money anymore. They didn't care about me. The woman who raised them, who sacrificed birthdays and sleep and dreams, had become an afterthought, a burden, a story they didn't want to hear again. That night I called Paul one last time. He answered after the third ring, his voice clipped. "Hey Mom. Sorry, can't talk long." "I just wanted to hear your voice," I said softly. "It's been quiet here." "Yeah, I've been swamped. Work's crazy. We'll catch up soon, okay?" "Soon," I echoed. But we both knew it meant never. Before I could say goodbye, the line went dead. I sat there, phone still in my hand, feeling the silence wrap around me again. I thought about calling Richard next, but what was the point? I already knew what I'd hear. Another excuse. Another soft rejection disguised as busyness. So instead, I turned off the phone and let the dark fill the room. The pie sat untouched on the counter, its scent fading just like everything else. I whispered to the emptiness. They didn't even ask how I was managing my rent. And for the first time, I began to wonder if love, real, unconditional love, had ever truly lived in this family at all. Kindness has a sound, soft footsteps on old wood, a knock that doesn't demand but asks. That's how Jamie started showing up. Quietly, gently, as if he didn't want to scare away what was left of me. The first time I thought he'd come by mistake. I hadn't heard from anyone in weeks, and the loneliness had started to sound like a second heartbeat. But there he was, standing in my doorway with a grocery bag in one hand and that familiar half-smile in the other. "Thought you might be running low," he said, lifting the bag. "And Grandpa always said no one should eat canned soup 2 nights in a row." I laughed, actually laughed. The sound startled both of us. Jamie filled the kitchen like sunlight breaking through clouds. He moved around with the easy warmth of someone who belonged there. He fixed the leaky faucet that had been dripping for months. He swept the porch without being asked. And he talked not about money or business or what people thought I'd lost, but about school, his friends, the music he was writing. For a while, I forgot about everything else. Sometimes, in the evenings, we'd sit on the back steps with mugs of tea, watching the sun melt behind the trees. He'd say things like, "You know, Grandma, I think peace just looks like this, quiet but not lonely." And I'd smile, pretending the tears in my eyes were from the wind. Because that boy, that sweet, unspoiled soul, was giving me back something my own children had taken. Hope. One night, as we cleared the dishes, he asked, Do you ever wish you could start over? His tone was casual, but I heard the weight beneath it. I think I did, I whispered. And maybe this time, I'm learning who's meant to come along. He nodded, not pushing. That's what I loved most. He never asked for explanations I wasn't ready to give. He didn't know about the secret bank account, the safety deposit box, the check with too many zeros sitting in my drawer. But somehow I think he understood that there was more to me than what the family thought I'd lost. The following week he came over with a small potted plant. For your windowsill, he said. It likes light but doesn't need much care. Like me. I teased. He grinned. You're tougher than that. His words lingered long after he left. I hadn't realized how starved I was for affection, the real kind. The kind that didn't measure worth in bank statements. That night I opened my old oak desk and pulled out a blank sheet of paper. At the top I wrote 3 words. Last will and testament. It wasn't final, just a draft. But as I wrote, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I didn't name my sons first. I didn't even write their names until the very end. Instead I began with Jamie. To my grandson who remembered love when others forgot. It wasn't about punishing anyone. Not yet. It was about recognition. A quiet acknowledgement that kindness should mean something in the end. The next few days Jamie kept coming by. He'd fix things that didn't need fixing, tell stories that made me laugh until I forgot the ache in my chest. Once he even brought a small notebook. Write down anything you want, he said. Stories, recipes, secrets. Someday I'll read them. I almost told him then, about the lottery ticket, the money, the truth. But something stopped me. Maybe fear. Maybe instinct. Maybe the small, selfish part of me that wanted to see how pure his heart truly was. Jamie, I said one afternoon as we sat under the maple tree, you're good. You know that. He shrugged, kicking a pebble across the grass. You just see what others don't bother to look for. His answer broke me a little. Because I realized that somewhere along the way this boy had grown up in a house where love had conditions. Just like his father and uncle. But somehow he'd managed to stay golden. Untainted. That night after he left, I folded the will carefully and tucked it beneath the old photograph of my late husband. The house was quiet again but not empty. For the first time in months I didn't dread the silence. Because I knew even if the rest of them forgot who I was, someone still saw me. Someone still cared. I touched the folded paper one last time and whispered to the darkness. He reminded me what family was supposed to feel like. They said I was losing my mind. But the truth was, for the first time in years I was seeing things clearly. The whispers started small. A neighbor's cautious glance. A cousin's pitying tone over the phone. I could almost hear the words forming behind their polite smiles. Poor Evelyn, she's not well these days. Within a week it had spread like wildfire. I'd walk into the grocery store and feel the silence shift around me. Familiar faces that once greeted me with warmth now exchanged knowing looks. Someone must have told them that I'd lost everything. But that wasn't enough for my sons. They needed a reason to justify their absence, to make themselves the victims of my downfall. And so the story changed. Suddenly I was confused, forgetful, irrational with money. They said I'd been making strange decisions since their father died. The irony? They hadn't been around long enough to know anything about me. One evening I got a call from Paul. His voice was sharp, impatient, the tone he used when pretending to be the responsible son. Mom, he said, we need to talk about your living situation. I sat at my kitchen table, the one I'd bought 40 years ago with my first bonus check, tracing the scratches from old family dinners. My living situation? I repeated softly. You're in over your head, he said. It's time to think about assisted living. Somewhere safe. We can sell the house and make sure you're taken care of. Sell my house. I let the words hang in the air, heavy and cold. He sighed like I was a stubborn child. Mom, you can't manage alone anymore. It's not healthy. I imagined his face. The same face that used to light up when I brought home his favorite chocolate cake. Now it was just calculating, impatient. You think I can't manage? I asked quietly. I'm saying you shouldn't have to, he said. Let us handle things now. Us meaning you and your brother? There was a pause. The kind of silence that admits guilt louder than any words could. When I hung up, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from rage. They wanted to sell my house. My memories. My sanctuary. The same home where I'd bandaged scraped knees, celebrated birthdays, and held my husband's hand as he took his last breath. Now they wanted to turn it into cash. For a moment I almost laughed. Because it was all unfolding exactly as I'd expected. When people think you're weak, they show you their truest faces. I poured myself some tea and stared out the window. The street was quiet except for the distant sound of children playing, the same spot where Paul and his brother used to ride their bikes. I wondered when love had become conditional in this family. When had they stopped seeing me as their mother and started seeing me as a burden? A few days later I ran into my daughter-in-law Lisa at the pharmacy. "Oh, Evelyn," she said in that syrupy voice of hers. "How are you holding up, dear? Paul told me about the confusion." I smiled. "Confusion?" She nodded quickly, eyes darting around. "You know, forgetting things. Misplacing money. It happens at your age. We just worry." Her pity was so fake it almost sparkled. I leaned in close enough for her perfume to sting my nose. "You tell Paul," I said, "that confusion and silence are not the same thing." She blinked, confused, truly confused this time. Then she smiled, brittle and awkward. "Of course, Evelyn. Take care." As she turned away, I could see her texting before she even reached her car. That night I sat alone in my dim living room. The air was heavy, the clock ticking louder than usual. Jamie hadn't come by in a few days, probably busy with college. I didn't want to worry him with these lies, this poison the others were spreading. But inside me something was shifting. Every cruel rumor, every greedy suggestion. It wasn't breaking me. It was sharpening me. I was done being their quiet, disposable mother. I looked around the room. The family photos, the furniture I'd chosen, the walls that had heard everything. Let them think I was frail. Let them believe I was losing touch. It was the perfect disguise. Because when the time came, they'd never see me coming. I smiled into the darkness, whispering to myself, "Let them think I'm weak. I've never been more awake." The day I decided to rewrite my legacy, the sky was the color of ash. It felt right. Quiet, secretive, almost like the world knew I was about to do something that would change everything. I stood outside my lawyer's office for a long moment, clutching my old handbag, the same one that had once carried a winning ticket worth $333 million. That ticket had felt heavy back then, not from paper, but from consequence. Now that weight was back in my hands. "Mrs. Harris," Mr. Lowell greeted, his glasses low on his nose, his tone respectful but curious. "It's been a while." "Yes," I said softly. "And I think it's time we made some changes." His office smelled of leather and dust. The kind of place where fortunes quietly shifted hands. Sunlight filtered through tall blinds, cutting stripes of gold across the desk. It almost looked holy. "I'd like to establish a trust," I continued. "One with very specific conditions." He paused, pen hovering. "And may I ask the purpose of this trust?" I smiled faintly. "To make sure kindness is rewarded, not bloodlines." For the next hour I spoke slowly, carefully, as if choosing each word could rewrite my past. I explained how the money, all $333 million of it, would be transferred into a private account under my control. It would remain sealed until after my death, or under one very particular circumstance. "If anyone in my family attempts to declare me incompetent," I said, "or tries to control my assets, the trust activates immediately." Mr. Lowell raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "And the beneficiary?" "Jamie Harris," I said without hesitation. "My grandson." He leaned back, studying me with quiet respect. "Most people your age, they tend to divide their estates evenly." "I've been even my whole life," I said. "Even with my time. Even with my love. Even with my forgiveness. And they took every last bit of it." I met his gaze. "This time I'm being fair, not even." He nodded slowly. "Understood." The sound of his pen scratching across paper was strangely satisfying. Each stroke felt like a small act of justice. As he read the terms aloud, I imagined their faces, my sons, their wives, the shock, the outrage, the disbelief. For once, they'd have to face what they'd become. And Jamie, sweet Jamie. He'd never know until the day came, but he'd understand why I did it. Because real wealth isn't given. It's earned through love, loyalty, and compassion. When the paperwork was done, Mr. Lowell handed me a folder. "Everything's in order." You'll have complete control over this trust until the activation conditions are met. I nodded, my fingers trembling slightly as I signed the final document. You've done something powerful here, Mrs. Harris, he said softly. Something that will speak long after you're gone. I smiled. That's the point, Mr. Lowell. I've spent my life being spoken over. It's time they finally listen, even if it's too late to apologize. As I stepped out into the sunlight, I felt lighter. The air was crisp, the city humming around me as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But inside something had shifted, a quiet flame of control rekindled. For months I had let them think I was fragile, fading, confused. But now I was the architect of their reckoning. I walked down the block, passing strangers who had no idea that a woman like me had just rewritten her story. One clause, one signature, one secret at a time. That evening I sat at my kitchen table, the folder resting in front of me. I poured myself a cup of tea, the same ritual I'd done every night for decades. Only this time the tea tasted sweeter. I imagined Jamie's face, his gentle eyes, his quiet laughter. I could almost hear him saying, "Grandma, you didn't have to do that." But I did. Because he had done something no one else had. He'd stayed. Before bed I tucked the folder into the back of my closet behind old photo albums and winter coats. No one would find it there. Not yet. I turned off the light and stood in the silence, letting the darkness wrap around me like an old friend. For the first time since that ticket changed my life, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I wasn't hiding from my family anymore. I was watching them. And soon they'd realize the difference between having power and deserving it. As I climbed into bed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. My face was lined, older, but my eyes, they were alive again. A slow, steady smile crept across my lips. I left the office smiling. I whispered into the quiet. For the first time, justice had a name. I had to know the truth, and sometimes, the only way to expose greed is to give it something to feast on. So I pretended to be dying. It started with a few phone calls. My voice soft, trembling, words deliberately slow. "Not feeling well these days," I'd said. "Doctor says it might be serious." By evening the news had spread faster than wildfire. For weeks they hadn't called, hadn't visited. But within hours of my illness, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Paul called first. His voice was all concern wrapped in calculation. "Mom, how bad is it? Should we come by?" "Yes," I said, barely a whisper. "Maybe for the weekend." "Oh, of course," he replied too quickly. "We'll be there." He hung up before I could respond. Not even a "love you." By Saturday morning my quiet little house looked like a vulture's nest. Cars lined the driveway. My sons and their wives arrived carrying fake smiles and expensive perfume. The same people who couldn't find time for me when I was broke were now hovering like I was a will waiting to be read. I sat propped up on the couch, blanket around my shoulders, the perfect image of frailty. They fussed over me not out of love but logistics. Lisa, my eldest daughter-in-law, walked through the living room like a realtor. "These old rugs could fetch something nice," she whispered to Paul. I caught the glint in her eye as she examined my china cabinet. In the kitchen I heard Mark, my younger son, muttering to his wife, "That piano alone could pay off the car." I kept my face neutral, eyes half closed, heart racing with quiet fury. They thought I was too weak to hear, too senile to notice. They had no idea they were performing for me. Jamie arrived later that evening, running in, breathless, his eyes red. "Grandma," he cried, kneeling beside me. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I wanted to tell him the truth, that this was all a test, that I wasn't sick at all. But I stayed in character. "I didn't want to worry you, sweetheart," I said softly, my voice cracking just enough to sell the lie. He took my hand, warm and trembling. "Don't talk like that," he said. "You're going to be okay." His sincerity pierced me like sunlight through glass. While my sons measured my worth in furniture and square footage, Jamie just sat there, holding my hand as if it were the only thing keeping me alive. He didn't look at the house or the antiques or the walls lined with memories. He looked at me. And in that moment I knew, if love was currency, Jamie was the richest man alive. Later that night I overheard my sons talking in the hallway. "If she passes," Paul whispered, "we'll need to handle the estate fast. Can't let the government eat it up." "Or Jamie," Mark added bitterly. "He's been hanging around too much lately." My stomach twisted. Even in my deception, Their greed managed to disgust me. I wanted to burst out of bed and scream, "You vultures! You're circling me before I'm even gone." But I didn't. I needed to see it through. The next morning Lisa brought me soup. It was cold. She smiled anyway. "How are we feeling today?" she asked sweetly, adjusting the blanket around me. I smiled weakly. "Better," I murmured. "Must be all the love in the room." She laughed, that hollow metallic laugh that only greedy hearts make. When she left the room, I turned to Jamie, who was sitting silently beside me, eyes full of worry. "Grandma," he said, "you should tell them to leave. You need rest." I smiled faintly. "Soon, darling. Very soon." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat alone in the dim light of the living room. The clock ticked softly, steady as my pulse. I looked around at the chairs they'd sat in, the silverware they'd appraised, the life they'd already divided among themselves. And I realized something chilling. Even if I had been dying, they wouldn't have mourned me. They'd have just waited for the paperwork. Jamie came in quietly, carrying a cup of tea. "You okay, Grandma?" I nodded. "Better now that you're here." He smiled softly. "You scared me, you know." I reached out and touched his cheek. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. I just needed to see something clearly." "What?" he asked. I looked at him, his kind eyes, his golden heart. "Who still has a soul," I whispered. He frowned, not understanding. But someday he would. When he left the room, I lay back against my pillow and stared at the ceiling. My sons had revealed everything I needed to know. Their greed was louder than their pity. And my dear Jamie, his kindness was the quietest, purest sound in the world. I closed my eyes, smiling to myself. He didn't know I was watching every single one of them. I had to die to finally live in peace. The morning my death was announced, the world felt unervingly calm. Birds sang, the kettle whistled, and I watched the sunlight crawl across the curtains like nothing had changed. But everything had. Because somewhere across town my sons were getting the call. It was all prearranged. My lawyer, Mr. Henson, had every instruction sealed in writing. A doctor's note, a death certificate forged by a discreet friend from my younger days. It was all part of the play. I had vanished. Quietly. Officially. The news spread faster than I could have imagined. "Evelyn Monroe passed peacefully in her sleep," the whispers said. "A kind woman, though a bit strange toward the end." Strange. That word made me smile. If only they knew how strange I could really be. I sat hidden in the little cabin behind the lake. The one no one ever remembered because I'd bought it decades ago in my maiden name. The air smelled of pine and rain-soaked wood. My only companion was an old transistor radio that hummed faintly in the corner. Jamie didn't know I was alive yet. That was part of it too. He'd learn soon enough, when the time was right. For now, I just needed to hear them react. The reading of the will was scheduled 2 days later. I pictured it perfectly. My family gathered in Mr. Henson's oak-paneled office, faces tight with fake grief. Paul pretending to dab his eyes. Mark scrolling his phone discreetly, waiting for numbers and assets. Meanwhile, the lawyer's calm, detached voice would echo over them like a sermon of justice. I wasn't there, not physically. But Mr. Henson, loyal to the very end, had agreed to record the whole thing for me. That afternoon, sitting by the window with the wind brushing my cheek, I pressed play. "Mrs. Evelyn Monroe's last will and testament," he began. Silence filled the room, even in the recording. I could almost see their faces tighten, their shoulders straighten. "My estate, including the Monroe residence, savings, and all investments, shall not be divided among my immediate children," Mr. Henson continued steadily. "Instead, I leave it in its entirety to Mr. Jamie Monroe." Then came the silence. The kind that hums like electricity before it strikes. And then chaos. "What the hell is this?" Paul shouted in the background. She was sick. She didn't know what she was doing. Mark's voice cut in, angry and disbelieving. "That's fraud. Jamie must have manipulated her." The women joined too, gasps, accusations, tears that weren't tears. I sat there trembling, half laughing, half crying. Because for once, their greed had found no audience. Mr. Henson's voice broke through the shouting like a calm sea. "Mrs. Monroe was of sound mind. I have every document, every signature, every witness. She was clear about her wishes." Lisa sneered. "Oh, I'm sure she was, after that boy brainwashed her." Jamie's voice rose, small but firm. "She wasn't brainwashed. She was loved. Something you people wouldn't recognize if it sat across the table. My throat tightened. I hadn't been there to defend myself, but hearing him stand for me, that was more than enough. I imagined his face, that soft ache behind his eyes, the disbelief mixed with loyalty. He must have felt both honored and terrified. He didn't know about the trust fund's conditions yet. Not the letter. Not the key hidden in the music box on my dresser. That would come later. For now, he was standing in a room full of wolves, defending the woman who'd finally learned how to fight back. Paul's chair scraped violently. "We'll contest this," he barked. "Every last cent." Mr. Henson's voice didn't waver. "You're welcome to try." But Mrs. Monroe anticipated that. Another pause. Then paper rustling, the second page. "In the event that any party attempts to challenge this will," he read, "their share, if any, will be permanently forfeited and donated to charity." There was my final move. My invisible hand slapping theirs away from the table they'd built over me. I paused the recorder, heart pounding. The sound of their outrage still echoed in my head. They had spent their lives chasing what they thought I owed them. But in the end, I gave it all to the only one who never asked for a thing. I leaned back, feeling my heartbeat slow, my breath steady. Outside, the lake rippled like silver glass. The wind carried faint laughter from somewhere. Maybe a memory, maybe relief. I took out my old locket, the one with my husband's photo on one side and a blank space on the other. For years I'd left it empty. But maybe now it was time to place Jamie's picture there. He'd brought light into a house built on shadows. He reminded me what family was supposed to feel like. The tape clicked off. Silence filled the cabin. I realized my hands were shaking. Not from fear. Not from regret. From something purer. Freedom. For the first time in decades, I felt alive. Untouched. Unowned. Still, I knew this wasn't over. The storm would only grow. Paul's anger, Mark's pride. They wouldn't accept defeat easily. And when they did find me, because men like them always do, I'd be ready. Because the dead woman they buried wasn't me. She was the ghost they created. And I was the one they'd never see coming. I thought I'd hidden well enough to vanish forever. But some hearts are too stubborn to stop looking. When I opened the cottage door that morning, there he was, Jamie. Standing in the fog, breathless, eyes red, holding the crumpled obituary that had announced my death. For a moment, the world froze between us. "Grandma," he whispered, voice breaking on the word. It wasn't a question. It was a heartbeat. I couldn't speak. I just stared at him. This boy who'd once fixed my faucet and carried my groceries, now standing like a man who'd walked through ghosts to find me. Tears welled before I even knew they were there. He stepped closer. "They said you were gone," he choked. I saw the funeral notice. Everyone was fighting, saying horrible things. But something didn't feel right. I came here. I remembered this place." His hand trembled as he reached toward me, half afraid I might disappear if he touched me. When his fingers finally brushed mine, I felt it, warmth, real and steady. And I knew I couldn't lie to him. Not to him. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I had to do it." He looked confused. "Do what?" "Pretend to die." I nodded slowly, stepping aside to let him in. The cottage smelled of tea and cedarwood, rain still dripping off the window pane. Jamie stood in the doorway, eyes darting between the cozy mess, half-read letters, empty cups, the folded newspaper with his family's faces scowling on the front page. "Sit down," I said gently. "You deserve the truth." We sat by the fire, two souls stitched together by something deeper than blood. I told him everything. The ticket. The secret. The act. The heartbreak of realizing what love becomes when money enters the room. And then, how he, unknowingly, had saved me from drowning in it all. As I spoke, his expression shifted. Disbelief, sorrow, pride, then something softer. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, voice cracking. "Because," I said quietly, "I needed to know who'd still care if I had nothing. And you did, Jamie. You showed up when everyone else vanished." His jaw tightened. "You shouldn't have had to test anyone to find love." That made me smile through the ache. Maybe not. But it's the only way I found the truth. The fire popped, scattering sparks like small golden secrets into the air. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "They're furious, you know. Dad said he'll get lawyers. Aunt Lisa said you lost your mind." "I did," I said softly. "But sometimes you have to lose your mind to find your peace." Jamie shook his head, half laughing, half crying. You really faked your own death. Grandma, you're insane. Apparently, I said. But a very rich, insane woman. He laughed, the sound I'd missed most. When the laughter faded, silence settled again. A kind of sacred stillness. He looked at me for a long moment. I don't want the money, he said finally. I know, I replied. No, you don't, he said more firmly. I don't even want to touch it. You've been alone here, hiding, scared. You don't need to hide anymore. I felt the tears before I could stop them. He reached over and took my hand. Come home with me. We'll face them together. I shook my head. I can't go back. Not yet. They need to believe I'm gone, long enough to understand what they destroyed. Jamie swallowed hard. They'll never understand. Maybe not, I whispered, staring into the fire. But I can live with that. I can live knowing that at least one person saw me, not my money, not my house, me. He squeezed my hand tighter. I did, Grandma. I always did. For a long time we just sat there. The wind outside howled against the windows like a memory trying to get in. I leaned my head against his shoulder, feeling his heartbeat under my cheek, steady, young, alive. I thought I'd never see you again, he murmured. You were never supposed to, I said softly. But maybe fate didn't like my plan. He smiled faintly. Guess it didn't. The clock ticked in the quiet. Each second felt like a new beginning. I left you a letter, I told him. In the safe deposit box. Everything you need to know, it's all there. But there's one thing that letter won't say. He looked up. What's that? I brushed a tear from his cheek. That you made me proud. You reminded me that kindness still exists, even when love gets twisted by greed. He hugged me then. No words. Just warmth. When he pulled back, his eyes were shining. So what now? He asked. Now. I smiled. Now we let the masks fall. Fully. Naturally. When they think the ghost of Evelyn Monroe is gone forever, that's when she'll finally speak again. He laughed softly. You sound like you're plotting a sequel. Maybe I am, I said. Life always leaves room for one. Outside, the fog began to lift, revealing a stretch of calm sea, endless, forgiving. Jamie walked to the window, hands in his pockets, watching the horizon. You could buy a mansion anywhere, he said quietly. But you chose this. I didn't need a mansion, I replied. I just needed peace. He nodded slowly. You found it. When he turned back, I saw it in his eyes. That same innocence, that same quiet strength that had once carried my groceries through the rain. He didn't care about the money. He never had. He cared about me, the woman behind the myth, behind the test, behind the lies. And that, I realized, was the real fortune I'd been searching for all along. I never wanted fame, but fate has a strange sense of humor. All I wanted was peace, and instead I became a headline. It started with a knock on my cottage door one misty morning. A woman's voice called out softly, Mrs. Monroe? Please, I'm not here for a story, unless you want to tell it. Of course she was there for a story. They all were. I opened the door anyway. There she stood, young, nervous, holding a recorder like it might explode. Her name was Lena. Freelance journalist. She said she'd been following whispers about a widow who vanished after a $333 million lottery win. Her tone was gentle, but her eyes were hungry for truth, not gossip. That's what made me let her in. The kettle whistled as she sat across from me, notebook shaking in her hands. I won't ask where the money is, she began. I just want to know why you disappeared. I smiled faintly. Because when you're surrounded by people who love your wallet more than your soul, disappearing feels like freedom. She didn't write that down right away. She just looked at me like she'd heard a sermon. We talked for hours. I told her everything, not the names, not the addresses, but the emotions. The heartbreak of realizing my family's love had conditions. The fear of testing them. The quiet joy of finding one person who stayed true. Jamie. Lena's eyes softened when I mentioned him. The grandson, she whispered. Yes, I said. The boy with a golden heart. She nodded slowly. You taught him something most people never learn. That love is richest when it costs you nothing. The rain began to fall outside, steady and rhythmic. I stared at the window, my reflection faint in the glass. Older now, calmer. I used to think wealth meant safety, I said. But money doesn't keep you warm when you're sitting alone at the dinner table. Lena's voice trembled. So what does? Kindness, I whispered. That's the real inheritance. She pressed her lips together, fighting emotion. For a long time she didn't speak, just let the words hang in the air like a prayer. Before she left, she asked one last question. Do you regret it? The fake death. The deception. The heartbreak I caused to find out the truth. I looked down at my hands, the same ones that once trembled holding a lottery ticket, now still and sure. No, I said. I regret believing they loved me for free. Her eyes glistened. She thanked me, promising to handle the story with care. I believed her. 2 weeks later, my quiet little secret became a national spectacle. The missing lottery widow speaks. The headline stretched across every screen, every magazine. The video clip of me, gray hair, soft cardigan, steady eyes, played on morning shows. I didn't give away the names, but everyone in my family recognized the story. Especially my sons. Jamie called me first. Grandma, you're trending. I laughed. Imagine that, me, an influencer. He chuckled through the phone, but I could hear the pride in his voice. They're calling you the woman who outsmarted greed. I didn't care for the fame. But I cared for the message that was spreading faster than gossip ever could. People weren't talking about the money. They were talking about kindness. I watched one of the broadcasts that night, the anchor quoting my words. Kindness is the real inheritance. They said it like it was poetry. Maybe it was. In living rooms across the country, people argued, cried, reflected. Families who hadn't spoken in years called each other again. Letters arrived at my cottage. Strangers thanking me for reminding them what love should look like. It was strange, finding redemption in a world I'd once hidden from. And then came the silence. After the noise faded, I received one more letter, from my eldest son, Mark. The handwriting was shaky, the tone uncertain. He wrote, I saw your interview. I'm sorry. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. But you were right, we loved the wrong thing. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer beside Jamie's college photo. Forgiveness wasn't instant. But it was coming. Slow like dawn after a long night. Weeks passed. The calls from journalists stopped. The mailbox filled only with flowers and kind notes. The world had moved on, but in a way I hadn't. Sometimes I'd sit by the ocean listening to the waves, wondering if they'd ever understand that I didn't do it for revenge. I did it for truth. And in the end, the truth had done what revenge never could. It humbled them. Jamie visited again on a Sunday, just like old times. We sat with tea as the sun melted into the horizon. He grinned. You changed people's hearts, Grandma. I smiled softly. No, Jamie. I just reminded them what theirs were for. He nodded, watching the water shimmer. You think they'll ever come see you? I sighed. Maybe one day. But even if they don't, I've already been seen. I never wanted fame, but fate has a strange sense of humor. All I wanted was peace, and instead I became a headline. It started with a knock on my cottage door one misty morning. A woman's voice called out softly, Mrs. Monroe? Please, I'm not here for a story, unless you want to tell it. Of course she was there for a story. They all were. I opened the door anyway. There she stood, young, nervous, holding a recorder like it might explode. Her name was Lena. Freelance journalist. She said she'd been following whispers about a widow who vanished after a $333 million lottery win. Her tone was gentle, but her eyes were hungry for truth, not gossip. That's what made me let her in. The kettle whistled as she sat across from me, notebook shaking in her hands. I won't ask where the money is, she began. I just want to know why you disappeared. I smiled faintly. Because when you're surrounded by people who love your wallet more than your soul, disappearing feels like freedom. She didn't write that down right away. She just looked at me like she'd heard a sermon. We talked for hours. I told her everything, not the names, not the addresses, but the emotions. The heartbreak of realizing my family's love had conditions. The fear of testing them. The quiet joy of finding one person who stayed true. Jamie. Lena's eyes softened when I mentioned him. The grandson, she whispered. Yes, I said. The boy with a golden heart. She nodded slowly. You taught him something most people never learn. That love is richest when it costs you nothing. The rain began to fall outside, steady and rhythmic. I stared at the window, my reflection faint in the glass. Older now, calmer. I used to think wealth meant safety, I said. But money doesn't keep you warm when you're sitting alone at the dinner table. Lena's voice trembled. So what does? Kindness, I whispered. That's the real inheritance. She pressed her lips together, fighting emotion. For a long time she didn't speak, just let the words hang in the air like a prayer. Before she left, she asked one last question. Do you regret it? The fake death. The deception. The heartbreak I caused to find out the truth. I looked down at my hands, the same ones that once trembled holding a lottery ticket, now still and sure. No, I said. I regret believing they loved me for free. Her eyes glistened. She thanked me, promising to handle the story with care. I believed her. 2 weeks later, my quiet little secret became a national spectacle. The missing lottery widow speaks. The headline stretched across every screen, every magazine. The video clip of me, gray hair, soft cardigan, steady eyes, played on morning shows. I didn't give away the names, but everyone in my family recognized the story. Especially my sons. Jamie called me first. Grandma, you're trending. I laughed. Imagine that, me, an influencer. He chuckled through the phone, but I could hear the pride in his voice. They're calling you the woman who outsmarted greed. I didn't care for the fame. But I cared for the message that was spreading faster than gossip ever could. People weren't talking about the money. They were talking about kindness. I watched one of the broadcasts that night, the anchor quoting my words. Kindness is the real inheritance. They said it like it was poetry. Maybe it was. In living rooms across the country, people argued, cried, reflected. Families who hadn't spoken in years called each other again. Letters arrived at my cottage. Strangers thanking me for reminding them what love should look like. It was strange, finding redemption in a world I'd once hidden from. And then came the silence. After the noise faded, I received one more letter, from my eldest son, Mark. The handwriting was shaky, the tone uncertain. He wrote, I saw your interview. I'm sorry. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. But you were right, we loved the wrong thing. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer beside Jamie's college photo. Forgiveness wasn't instant. But it was coming. Slow like dawn after a long night. Weeks passed. The calls from journalists stopped. The mailbox filled only with flowers and kind notes. The world had moved on, but in a way I hadn't. Sometimes I'd sit by the ocean listening to the waves, wondering if they'd ever understand that I didn't do it for revenge. I did it for truth. And in the end, the truth had done what revenge never could. It humbled them. Jamie visited again on a Sunday, just like old times. We sat with tea as the sun melted into the horizon. He grinned. You changed people's hearts, Grandma. I smiled softly. No, Jamie. I just reminded them what theirs were for. He nodded, watching the water shimmer. You think they'll ever come see you? I sighed. Maybe one day. But even if they don't, I've already been seen.